Sinful Creatures, written and read by Ren Bryant. Inside Kevin's head, thoughts of violence, brutal images of slashing and stabbing exploded like fireworks. Impulsivity came alive within him, making him shift in his seat. Little black spots filled his vision, and Kevin thought he was going to pass out. So he closed his eyes and tried to steady himself by breathing slowly through his nose. "Hey Kevin, you feeling okay? You've been acting strange, buddy." It was Simon, Kevin's best friend, leaning across the aisle to talk to Kevin in first period history class. "You don't look too good, man." Kevin shook off his friend and stared down at his desk. His eyes were unfocused. Anything beyond a few feet was blurry. He tugged at his Pittsburgh Pirates ball cap to try and hide. Sweat dripped off his nose. He could hear it clink on his wooden desk in slow motion as the teacher went blah, blah, blah. It wasn't sweat that was falling onto his desk, Kevin thought. It was his soul leaking out of him. He wondered if this is how it was for his sister Trudy when she dropped a pinky. Kevin pulled his baseball cap off his head and wiped his brow, looking around at his class, who were all scribbling down something Mr. Thompson put on the dry erase board. "Hey dude," Simon whispered, "what the hell's wrong with you?" Kevin ignored the question. What was he going to say? That he went from being a church choir boy to a druggie? That he's slowly being erased as the chalky pink pill dissolved on his tongue and turned him into a sinful creature? That life looks different when there's no fear of consequences, when there's no shame or remorse? That all of this was happening and he thought it would be the most wonderful feeling in the world? Kevin caught a grotesque reflection of himself in the metal backing of the chair in front of him. The blackness under his eyes, the telltale sign of pinky use, seemed to be spreading. He tugged his ball cap lower. Drop a pinky, stare at the mirror, and wait. Everyone's doing it. All you gotta do is take the pill and look into the mirror. The mirror sees all. It sees you as the stain you are. It finds the creature inside of you, that being of sin, and makes you become what you hide and repress. The wicked, the adulteress, the thief, the killer, the sinner in the flesh. It feels so good to just let it all go, to not give a fuck about giving a fuck. That's what pinkies do. They make you feel nothing inside. And when you feel nothing, you no longer care about anything. It's such a wondrous thought, isn't it? To care not one single bit about people, about things like current events, or opinions or fashion, or anything except doing whatever it is you want. When you pop a pinky, it's out with the old. The couple robbing a bank, the man jerking off in broad daylight, the woman eating an eyeball of a stranger while walking down the street. Anything and everything happens under the influence of a pinky. Anything and everything happens when you're free to no longer care. 5 years ago, in 2036, Congress banned the precursor behind pinky after it went from a designer party drug to a law and order nuisance. But banning anything doesn't remove the thing itself. People still want to feel good, no matter the cost. So pinky continued to blight the land as people chased the feeling of euphoria. Law and order tried to protect as best they could, but pinky users began littering our underpasses and making public parks uninhabitable. Hothead radio talk show hosts called the situation the pinky wave or the pinko scourge. They called it a mental disorder and said this is what happens when you take guardrails off of society. They said we have rules and morality for a reason, don't we? Cities had entire streets of pinky users that people no longer felt comfortable walking down. Sometimes pinky junkies took over multiple city blocks and created square miles of anarchy. As long as they kept to themselves, though, the cops didn't much care if these fiends ripped each other's brains out. So they pushed them together, fenced them in, and let them be. Eventually, these places grew into pinky ghettos, inner city reservations, urban blight. The next natural step, of course, was for the decent-minded to flee towards the suburbs and build pinky-free communities far from the city centers. Wonderful places behind walls, big beautiful walls, where life could continue as normal. Churches took over in these cities, and the priests were seen as the guardians, the ones who would keep the sin away. A good life, the community brochure promising a better tomorrow one track house at a time read. The back of the pamphlet showed a cutout of a silver-haired man in a yellow polo shirt, flashing a fake white megawatt grin, with a golf club over his shoulder and an aerial shot of the 18th hole beneath him. The unwritten ad copy read, "None of those dirty fucking creatures to pollute your sensibilities in our community." But nowhere was creature-free, no matter how high the walls got. Kids everywhere got bored out of their fucking skull and became desperate to know what life would feel like if they were truly free to be themselves, without fear of judgment or consequences. The kids didn't care what the cost was. They thought they were invincible. Kevin lived in Stone Meadows, an upper-crust creature-free community of about 20,000 people. It was the kind of place that required lawns to be well-kept and green year-round. On any given weekend, you'd see the men of Stone Meadows out with their edgers, getting things picture-perfect. Or maybe they'd have their rulers in hand to ensure each blade of grass was within 3 to 3 3/4 inches, as required by the Stone Meadows HOA rules. Or maybe they were standing there with a gardening hose in their hand, pretending to water the petunias while secretly ensuring the neighbor's dog didn't piss on their lawn. Fucking Stone Meadows. That's how Kevin's sister described the place before she left its walls, drifting towards a life of freedom, allowing her creature to fly its freak flag. That was 6 years ago, when Kevin was 10. At the time, Kevin was hurt and mad, but he tried to understand as best he could why his sister would take a pinky and flake out like she did. It was right after Mom died, and life was tough for everyone. Mom was the family's everything. Losing her turned Dad into a real nasty piece of work. He retreated into himself and would snap at Kevin and Trudy. So when Trudy started getting some lip and talking back to him, her dad wouldn't have any of it. She screamed she was going to take a pinky and be free from this hellhole. He said, "Go ahead." He dared her. Though Kevin and Trudy were close, they never much talked about things like feelings. Kevin could tell, though, that she was hurting after their mom had died. They all were. And just like her dad, Trudy didn't know how to deal with the grief, so she lashed out in her own way. It was just that her way was the sinful way. Trudy popped a pinky and stared at the mirror, looking deep into herself. Then she tried ripping out her dad's throat. She went primal. Spit flew from her mouth as she screamed she was going to kill him. She scratched his face, trying to bite out his Adam's apple. Dad was able to get her down and hog-tie her with some duct tape. He prayed for her soul, the only thing he knew how to do, and tossed her into the Suburban, driving her to the Stone Meadow gates. "I'll continue to pray for you," he said as she walked to the darkness and misery beyond the walls. Dad said Trudy didn't even look back once. The shock of losing his daughter shortly after losing his wife sent Kevin's dad over the edge even more. He began to drink heavily and was overprotective of his son. People used to joke that inside Stone Meadow walls, things were even worse than on the outside, where those sinful creatures lived. Kevin stopped laughing at that after his family unraveled. After his ball hair grew in, Kevin started wondering about his place in life, what kind of job he would get, what his future would look like. Would he end up like his dad and be a miserable son of a bitch? Kevin wondered if Trudy left because of a sense of emptiness and a gnawing sense of dissatisfaction with things inside the community, because that's how Kevin had been feeling. Kevin's parents told him he was special when he was little. His mother told him that again right before she died. But Kevin didn't feel special anymore. He missed happiness, the happiness that came from an intact family. Kevin heard rumors that Trudy was still alive outside the walls of Stone Meadows. He tried to tell his dad, but Dad didn't want to hear it. She was lost, his dad said. Forget about her. But Kevin noticed his eyes tearing up when he said this. Kevin could tell he didn't want to forget about her. Not really. Kevin wanted Trudy back. He wanted to have some semblance of a family again. He drew up plans for how he could get her, how they could be reunited as a family. Kevin knew the only way to survive outside the walls of Stone Meadows would be to turn into the thing he didn't want to be. He had to be a savage among savages. Kevin wondered how it felt to take a pinky. He wondered if being free meant being happy. How would it feel to be and do whatever it is he wanted to do, to feel content? That's what Kevin was thinking about as he was cutting through Price Park on his way to school. In the bushes tucked under a large oak tree, Kevin saw some faces he recognized. He didn't know their names, but he saw these kids sometimes when he walked through Dirtball Hall. These kids always wore dirty blue jeans and heavy metal t-shirts. That's how he noticed them now. The cherry red AC/DC logo gave the group away. Kevin stopped and watched as one of the kids distributed small pink oval pills. The group opened their mouth and stuck out their tongues. They clinked the pills together as if they were saying cheers and placed the pills on their tongue. Then the kids took out their mirrors and held it in front of their faces, staring at themselves. A thought appeared in Kevin's head. Dust from the ephemeral. Lift the veil of who you are, it said. So Kevin entered the bushes and sat cross-legged next to the group as they stared into their mirrors. Without taking his eyes off his reflection, Mr. AC/DC handed Kevin a pinky and smiled. There was no trepidation as Kevin placed the pinky on his tongue. He thought about freedom. He thought about his sister. He leaned into the kid sitting next to him and stared into his mirror. It was lunchtime when the effects of the pinky really started to take hold of Kevin. His body began to feel strange, as if every cell within him was exploding with a newfound energy. He was seized by urges he had never experienced before, dark, morbid desires that seemed to compel him to do things he knew were wrong. But even as these terrible thoughts bubbled from within him, he found himself not caring about the consequences. He found himself liking the idea of sinning. Kevin's heart rattled against his ribcage, and he started breathing rapidly through his nose. A sickly grin crept across his face as he reveled in the repressed sensations that began flowing through him. It was sex and violence, all mixed up into one ball of ecstasy. The pinky was tearing down the walls of his conscience, and in the wreckage, Kevin discovered a wild sense of freedom. As the moral compass inside of him shattered, Kevin felt his inhibitions slip away like sand through his fingers. All the things he had been taught to repress, all the emotion that he had been trained to contain, were now bursting forth like a geyser. The boundaries that once held him in check no longer mattered. He was free to act on his every impulse, and a thought both exhilarated and terrified him. Simon could see something was very wrong with Kevin. The ungodly look in his eyes and the black-hearted grin on his face. Simon knew he had to act quickly. "Kevin, man, let's get you to the bathroom," Simon said, grabbing his friend by the arm and leading him through the crowded cafeteria. Once inside the bathroom, Simon turned the faucet on and began to splash handfuls of cold water onto Kevin's face. The water seemed to have little effect on his friend's dazed expression. "Kevin, talk to me," Simon pleaded, growing increasingly panicked. "Your eyes are like black holes, man. Wait, don't tell me. Did you take a pinky? Is that what happened to you?" Yeah, Simon, I took a pinky. I thought it was the only way I could get my sister back. She's out there, outside the walls. She's alive. I thought if I could be like her, I could survive out there, go get her and bring her back. Simon stared at him in shock, unable to comprehend that his friend had willingly chosen to go down this dangerous path. He knew things had been difficult for Kevin at home, but he never thought it would come to this. Desperation and fear flickered in Simon's eyes as he searched for a way to help his friend. "We need to get you out of here," Simon said, "before you lose control completely and go nuts in the school." Kevin swayed as if there were invisible people on either side of him, pushing him to and fro. His face was slack, with a distant stare that said he wasn't all there. "That's not the only reason I took the pinky, though," he said, staring at the bathroom wall. "I had to know. I had to find out what it would be like to be free. I needed to know what it was like, to not care about anything, to just let go. I thought maybe it would bring me closer to Trudy, help me understand her." As they stood in the oppressively bright bathroom, a fluorescent light flickered ominously, creating a strobe-like effect. Kevin began fervently scratching his arms, as if it had 1,000 mosquito bites. The pinky had taken hold of him, and they were running out of time. "Kevin, look, there's got to be a better way than this. This is dangerous. You're putting yourself, everyone around you, at risk." Kevin put his hand on his friend's shoulder, struggling to maintain control of himself. He locked eyes with Simon. "Promise me you'll let us back in," he said. "When I get my sister, let us back into Stone Meadows." Simon hesitated. "But you'll be a sinner. You'll be defiled." Kevin shook his head. "No, the effects of pinky, it wears off. If I take it once, I'll be fine. Just look for us by the gate, that's all. Just look for us and let us in." Simon let out a deep sigh. "Look, let me figure out a place I can put you, somewhere safe, lock you away where you won't be a danger. Then we can find your sister together, when you're clean and clear-headed. But right now, I need to get you out of this school." As students finished their lunch, Simon led Kevin out of the school building, taking care to avoid detection by teachers and other students. They moved cautiously, darting from one hiding spot to another. The school grounds seemed to stretch on endlessly, a surreal labyrinth designed to keep them trapped within its boundaries. Finally, they reached the edge of the woods in Price Park. Kevin couldn't help but laugh bitterly at the irony of the situation. The very place where his nightmare had begun was now serving as a temporary refuge. "Stay here, Kevin," Simon instructed, his voice wavering with concern. "I'll go back to school and come up with a plan to help you, but just stay hidden, okay? Just stay here." Kevin nodded, his eyes burning with a mixture of gratitude and pain. He watched as Simon disappeared back into the school, leaving him alone with his hellish thoughts. As Kevin stood there, the sounds of the city beyond the park's edge filled his ears. Women screamed, car horns blared, and chaos reigned. Somewhere amid the madness, a gunshot rang out, chilling him to the bone. He knew it was the kids he had taken the pinky with in the morning. Their transformations were complete, and they had become manifestations of sin itself. Kevin felt a burning sensation throughout his body and dropped to his knees. The pain was agonizing, like his skin was being peeled away layer by layer. Yet through the torment, he could feel a sense of liberation and power building within him. The allure of the pinky was taking hold. No longer would he be bound by society's expectations or the opinions of others. The city's chaos echoed through the woods, a symphony of pain and destruction that mirrored the transformation happening within Kevin. He thought about his sister Trudy and how she also had chosen this path. He wondered if she had felt the same excruciating pain as her creature was unleashed. Did she regret her choice, or had she fully embraced the monstrous freedom the Pinky offered? And could he reach her? Would he find her in the anarchy outside the walls? Would he be able to bring her home and have a family again? As the pain reached its crescendo, Kevin felt the surge of power rise from within him. His senses sharpened, his vision clearer than it had ever been. He could hear the beating hearts of squirrels in the trees and the smell of decay of fallen leaves on the forest floor. He was no longer just Kevin. He was something more, something primal and untamed. The rustling of leaves and the snap of twigs announced Simon's return. As Kevin came into view, his eyes widened in horror at the sight of his transformed friend. Kevin was naked, hunched over, breathing heavily from his mouth. "Kevin, what happened to you?" Simon stammered, taking a step back. Kevin could feel the darkness within him, straining for release, begging to be set free. The last vestiges of his humanity clung to the hope that Simon could save him, but the beast inside him was too powerful to resist. With a snarl, Kevin lunged at Simon. The boy's eyes filled with terrors. Kevin's teeth sank into his flesh, tearing through his skin and muscle with inhuman strength. Simon's body convulsed, and he let out a choked cry, his lifeblood spilling onto the forest floor. Kevin ate through Simon's throat, turning his face into a mask of crimson. He was now a savage killer, a sinner, and he felt great. As Kevin stood over Simon's lifeless form, an unsettling sense of satisfaction washed over him. The kill made him excited, and his dick stood to attention. Kevin defiled the corpse of his once best friend as the last embers of his humanity flickered and died, leaving only the monstrous creature that the Pinky had birthed. With a feral grin, Kevin bounded through the trees towards the city, the scent of blood and chaos drawing him in like a moth to a flame. His fellow creatures were already there, leaving a trail of death and destruction. Kevin was free to embrace the darkness and become the monster he had always secretly longed to be. He was no longer bound by morals, by society, or by any semblance of the person he once was. Downtown Stone Meadows was chaos, Sin City personified as the gang of creatures did as they pleased. Women ran, blood spilled, and no one was safe. Kevin felt better than he ever had before as he attacked anyone he saw. As madness reigned, the authorities did their best to intervene, slowly closing a circle around the creatures, picking them off one by one with their assault rifles. Kevin stood blood-soaked and naked in the middle of the street, the last creature of the bunch alive. He was in the middle of a circle of terrified townspeople. Foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth, and his breath came in ragged, animalistic gasps. He could feel the urge to lash out, to inflict violence on those around him, but he was held at bay by the cold steel of their guns, all aimed at his heart. The town had had enough of their sinful nature. Out of the tense crowd stepped a tall, solemn priest in flowing black robes. The priest was the real sheriff of Stone Meadows. What he commanded, people did. They did it because he kept the sin away. He kept their community safe. The priest regarded Kevin with a mixture of pity and stern resolve. He held up a Bible in one hand, and as he spoke, his voice resonated with the wisdom and authority of generations. "Do you not know, my son, that the wages of sin is death?" he intoned, quoting from Romans 6:23. "You have been led astray by temptation, my son, and now you stand before us, showing us the destructive power of sin." Kevin's eyes darted back and forth, searching for an escape, but he found none. The priest continued, "You have embraced darkness and rejected the light. You have cast aside your humanity, and now you stand on the precipice of eternal damnation." The circle of townspeople tightened around Kevin. The priest spoke louder, his voice resolute. "The punishment of sin is death, and it is too late for you to repent and seek forgiveness." The priest locked eyes with Kevin. Kevin's entire body shook. All he wanted to do was kill and fuck. His primal being hated the notion of goodness or boundaries or anything that wasn't excess. The cold barrel of a shotgun pressed against the back of Kevin's skull. He thought for a split second to turn and attack, but even the sinful wanted to survive. Suddenly, a familiar figure pushed through the crowd, his face a portrait of desperation and grief. It was Kevin's father, his eyes red-rimmed from the torment he had endured over the loss of his wife and the transformation of his children. "Please," he pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "Don't kill my boy. Show him mercy. You all know the pain my family has suffered. Losing my wife, Trudy becoming whatever she is now. Can you find it in your hearts to spare him? He's my boy." The town people shifted uncomfortably, their expressions softening with sympathy. They knew Kevin's father had endured more than any person should, and the thought of taking away his remaining child weighed heavily on their consciousness. The priest looked at him sternly and slowly shook his head. "Please, let me take him to the gates," the father continued, his voice thick with tears. "I will do it, just as I did with Trudy. But please don't shoot him. Let me handle this in my own way. I'll get him outside the gates, and he won't bother us again." The group exchanged uneasy glances, grappling with the difficult decision before them. Finally, a consensus was reached, and over the priest's objections, they agreed to let the father take him to the gates. As they lowered their weapons, the father approached his son, his eyes filled with sorrow. He couldn't believe his son would go the route that Trudy did. He thought his son was better than that. And while he may not have been the best father, he could at least do one final act of goodness for his son. Allow him to live as a pinky junkie, an outcast in the world of sin beyond the gates. Maybe he could even find Trudy, he thought, and they could sin together. As the gate of Stone Meadow closed behind Kevin, he found himself in a world of chaos and debauchery. The stench of blood hung in the air. Madness had overtaken the land. What lay before Kevin was a scene straight from the darkest corners of human imagination, a living nightmare come to life. People engaged in unspeakable acts, their humanity all but erased, replaced by raw primal desire. The ground was littered with corpses, mutilated beyond recognition, limbs and heads strewn about like discarded playthings. There were fires, screams of pain and pleasure, gunshots, and the sickening sound of bones breaking. Some individuals writhed on the ground, their faces contorted in agony, gnashing their teeth and wailing in torment. It was as if they had been plunged into the very depths of hell, just as the priest had warned about in Sunday school. Yet Kevin, standing amid this grotesque panorama, felt no fear or revulsion. His mind, twisted by Pinky's influence, saw only opportunity. With every depraved act, he felt an irresistible pull, a yearning to join the masses in their spiral into darkness. The shackles of morality and conscience had been stripped away, leaving him free to indulge in the most wicked of desires. And so, with a sick grin and a heart devoid of empathy, Kevin stepped forward, eager to immerse himself in the pandemonium that surrounded him, casting aside any semblance of the person he once was. In this hellish landscape, he had found his twisted heaven, a place where he could finally succumb to the darkness that had taken root within him. As Kevin maimed and killed, his mouth was slick with blood, his senses heightened to an unnatural degree. It felt as if he had 100 coffees coursing through his veins, fueling manic energy that propelled him forward. The taste of iron lingered on his tongue, only serving to amplify his insatiable bloodlust. As Kevin stumbled through the chaos, a sharp, sudden pain exploded in his ribs. He felt the cold steel of a spear pierce his flesh from behind. Blood gushed from the wound, flowing out of him like water from a broken dam. Gasping in agony, Kevin mustered the strength to yank the spear free, the metal scraping against his bones as he did so. Fueled by rage, he lunged at the man, driving the spear through his stomach with savage force. The man grunted and his eyes widened in horror as Kevin lifted him off the ground, the spear impaling him like a marshmallow skewered on a stick. Blood dripped from the tip of the spear as Kevin held the man aloft, his face a gnarly mask of pain and vengeance. As the life drained from his victim, Kevin discarded him and stumbled onward. The pain in his side was a mere distraction from the overwhelming hunger to cause violence and destruction. Kevin was lost in the darkness, and the darkness welcomed him with open arms. Kevin's ears perked up at the sound of his name being shouted amid the chaos. It was a voice that seemed familiar, yet distant, almost like a memory buried deep from within him. As he turned to face the source, he found himself locking eyes with Trudy. Trudy's appearance was a stark contrast to the vibrant, lively sister that Kevin once knew. Her once shining eyes were now sunken and hollow, the sparkle that once filled them replaced by a haunted, hunted expression. Her once rosy cheeks were now gaunt, the bones of her face appearing more prominent as her skin clung tightly to them. Her once lustrous hair had become matted and tangled, with dirt and grime streaking through unkempt locks. Her once smooth complexion was marred by numerous scars, each one telling a silent story of the horrors she had faced. Her clothes, ragged and torn, hung loosely on her emaciated frame, offering little protection against the harsh world outside the walls of Stone Meadows. The once strong and confident posture she carried had been replaced by a perpetual hump, as if she was always bracing herself for the next attack. In spite of her haggard appearance, however, there was still a spark of determination in her eyes. This look would come out after the pinky high wore off, when a few brain cells would start firing, and she would long for home, desperate for salvation. Kevin didn't recognize his sister. All he saw was another potential victim. He lunged forward, but Trudy was ready for him. She had been surviving in this hellscape for a while now, and her reflexes were sharp. She dodged his attack and expertly restrained him, holding him at bay. As Kevin struggled against her grip, something within him stirred. It was the sin of lust, and he found himself touching his crotch. Trudy knew it was the pinky, not his true feelings. "Kevin, it's me, Trudy," she said, her voice cracking with a mix of exhaustion and desperation. "Life after the pinky high it's horrible. You're constantly craving it, needing the pinky just to feel normal out here, to survive the madness." Trudy's eyes welled up with tears as she continued. "I've done horrible things, unspeakable things, things I never thought I could do, the same things you have done, but 1,000 times over. We need redemption, Kevin. We need to find a way back inside the walls of Stone Meadows, to get clean and escape this nightmare." Kevin came to completion, relaxed as he breathed deeply through his nose. It was the moment Trudy needed, the split second after release when there was vulnerability. Trudy did her best to comfort him, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. "You're still in there, Kevin," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the chaos around them. "You're still my little brother, and I love you. We can fight this together." In that moment, Trudy's love and determination sparked a glimmer of hope within Kevin. His high was subsiding. It was a small light of darkness, yes, but it was enough to remind him of his humanity and that there was still a chance for redemption for both of them. Kevin and Trudy moved through the darkness, their hands clasped tightly, the connection anchoring them both in the middle of the chaos. As they approached the gates of Stone Meadows, Trudy looked at the neat, orderly houses on the other side. She told Kevin about her attempts to return to life she once knew. For years she had tried to catch the attention of the people within Stone Meadows, hoping to be seen and acknowledged as someone worthy of redemption. But the residents inside the walls preferred to avert their eyes, unwilling to confront the sins and suffering that lay just beyond their neatly manicured lawns. Kevin and Trudy began to scream and shout for help. Their voices rose in unison, a desperate plea that echoed through the air and reached the ears of the residents inside the walls. For a moment they dared to hope when they saw a face turn towards them. A flicker of recognition flashed in the person's eyes, but just as quickly, it was gone. The resident looked away, as if seeing the siblings would be acknowledging the darkness that existed just beyond the walls. "How fucking typical," Trudy said. As they contemplated their next move, a low growl cut through the air. The siblings turned to find themselves face to face with a group in the throes of a pinky high, the embodiment of sin and violence. Their eyes filled with rage and hunger. One held a pipe, another a baseball bat. Kevin and Trudy clasped their hands together tighter. Their eyes locked together in a silent vow to protect each other, no matter what. They stood back to back, bracing themselves for the brutal assault that was about to come. The first creature leapt at them with an animalistic shout. Their every muscle strained to fend off the attacker. Desperation fueled their resolve to claw their way back into the haven of Stone Meadow. But the onslaught became overwhelming. The sickening, repeated thuds of the pipe and bat reverberated throughout their bodies, splintering bones and driving them into the cold ground. Trudy shielded her younger brother with her body, becoming a sacrificial barrier. The relentless battering transformed her into a lifeless, crimson-stained shroud. Satisfied with their beatdown, the creatures pissed on their victims and walked away. Kevin moved from under his sister, and when he stood, he could see her broken and bloodied husk. "Trudy!" Kevin yelled, bending down to check if she was still alive. He took her hand in his, and she gave a gentle squeeze. "Do you think there's still a chance for us?" she said, her voice as weak as a whisper. "After everything we have done, the horrible things we've consciously committed and enjoyed." Kevin gazed into her tormented eyes, his own reflecting a similar turmoil. The pinky was totally out of his system now, and he felt more vulnerable than ever. His body was flooded with emotion, and he fought back tears. "Trudy, I know it's hard to believe, but we have to have faith. It's true, we've sinned. We've given in to our darkest desires, but that doesn't mean we're beyond redemption. That's not what the scripture says." Kevin wasn't sure he believed those words, but they were the best he had. "But how can we be saved, Kevin? We've been monsters." Trudy coughed up blood. Kevin reached out and took both of his sister's hands, gripping them tight. "We have to believe, Trudy. We have to believe. We've lost ourselves, but if we could find the strength to face our sins and truly repent, then maybe, just maybe, we can be saved." Kevin leaned against the gate and again shouted for help. From the darkening skies came a figure. It was their father. They stared in disbelief. They could see their father's eyes welling up with tears as he gazed upon his broken children. "I can't believe it's come to this," he said, his voice choked with sorrow. "My own flesh and blood, out here, like this." Trudy's body began to tremble, and she coughed up more blood. Seeing his sister's condition deteriorate, Kevin held her close in his arms. "Dad, Trudy's dying. Please, we need help. We need to get inside, now. We're okay. We're not sinners anymore." Their father's eyes, filled with sadness and compassion, met Kevin's frantic gaze. He stuck his fingers through the gate and touched those of his son. I don't know that I can do anything for you, son." A sudden gust of wind swirled around them, accompanied by a sense of unease. Out of the shadows stepped the priest, his piercing eyes focused on the father and his desperate children. "Be wise, my friend," the priest cautioned, his voice calm yet commanding. "Do not invite sin into your sanctuary." He recited a passage from the Bible, his words echoing with the weight of divine wisdom. Romans 6:23, "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Jesus Christ our Lord." They cannot be redeemed. Sin separates man from God, and sin has no place within the sanctuary of Stone Meadows. The father hesitated, torn between the love for his children and the duty to protect his community from the sins that had consumed them. His eyes met those of the priest, and in that moment he seemed to find resolve. "I understand," he whispered, his voice trembling with heartache. The father's eyes, previously filled with hope, now clouded with despair. The priest's arm settled around his shoulder, guiding him back to the community, leaving his children to their fate. "Dad!" Kevin yelled. "Dad!" He kicked the gate, screamed and shouted, but their dad didn't even look back once, not with the priest next to him. In the land outside Stone Meadows, anarchy swelled. Kevin looked at Trudy and wondered how long she had. He knew there would be another attack soon, probably something worse than last time. Trudy, her strength waning, reached into her pocket and retrieved 2 small pink pills in a hand mirror. With her trembling fingers, she handed one to Kevin. "Take it," she said. "We need to survive." Kevin opened his mouth and placed the pill on his tongue. He helped Trudy with her pill. Together, they stared into the mirror until their humanity slipped away, replaced by the all-consuming hunger of sin. Maybe somewhere out there, there's a cure, a place of salvation. Maybe someplace kinder than Stone Meadows. They could hope anyways, and as long as they could survive, they could hope.